Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and another tutorial. Today I am super excited to be showing you how to make the Stonecrop Satchel by Blue Calla Patterns. I am actually very honored that Selena Blue Calla has let me do this. She does her own videos. I will actually remember to put the tutorial link of her tutorial for this in the description. Yes, but she let me do the tutorial for the Stonecrop, which is amazing because this is one of my favorite bags to make. This tutorial is a little longer than most of them. This bag is a little bit more complex than the average pattern. It has a built-in wallet, sort of, under this flap here. You have card slots, you have your two slip pockets and a zipper pocket. I just love this bag. In the back, you have a very large zipper that goes the whole, pretty much the whole back of the bag. It's got a recessed zipper. On the inside, we have a zipper pocket and two slip pockets. Yeah, I just love this pattern. I have made many of these bags already. Usually I try to do a tutorial the first time I'm making a bag, but this one bag is actually very special. Today, December 23rd, is my cousin Shelly's birthday, and this bag is for her. And she had ordered this and she was really hopeful I was going to be able to do a tutorial on it. So I reached out to Celine and she said I could. So happy birthday, Shelly. I love you. I know she's going to be watching this tutorial, so I had to get that plug in here. Interfacings I used in this bag, I used for my woven interfacings, I used EB Fuse Light, which I got from Emmeline Bags. It's a new product that I have tried, and I can tell you right now, I am absolutely loving it. For the card slots, I used EB Fuse Medium. It's just a little bit thicker than the EB Fuse Light. The EB Fuse Light is very similar to SF101. I actually think it might be a little bit heavier than SF101, but it is a fantastic product. In the bottom, I honestly don't remember if I used Peltex or Decovil Heavy in the bottom, but one of them is in this bottom part. I used Pellon Flex Foam for the main stabilizer. All my hardware, except for the zipper and zipper pulls, was from Emmeline Bags. The zipper and zipper pulls were from Blue Calla, who also wrote this pattern. I did do a few things different in this bag that the pattern doesn't have written in. My handles, the way I did my handles is different than how is written in the pattern. So if you want to make them like the pattern, make sure you refer to Celine's tutorial and she'll walk you through doing all that. I did them the way that I do on all of my bags. I try to keep a uniform type of a look to a lot of my bags and some of the things that I do. That includes, I always do my slip pockets and my zipper pockets a certain way. So I did those different than what's in the pattern as well. Not incredibly different, just a little bit different. I've included those links down below. And again, if you want to do it like the pattern and you need a video tutorial, definitely check out Celine's tutorial. What else did I do? The other thing I did different is because I didn't want, if you can see here, it's recessed zipper. So in the pattern, where it's black right here, that would have been the lining fabric. I didn't want the lining fabric to show in this top panel, so I did it in vinyl here, and then I had to adjust my gusset pieces so I could have vinyl at the top of the gussets here. I do show you how I do that in this tutorial. What else? I really think that's all I changed, and they really weren't major changes, just a little bit of tweaks that I like to do with it. I already had a Meet the Bags video for this that I made a long time ago. If you want to see that, make sure you check my Meet the Bags videos. Okay, my faux leather, this gray metallic one is the part of the metallics collection from Emmeline Bags. My black is a marine vinyl from Fabricville. That's a Dakota marine vinyl. And I don't think there's anything else to say about this bag. So without further ado, let's get to this tutorial. Okay, you are going to need medium-sized rivets, your nameplate or handmade tag, a turn lock, You're going to need 6 zipper pulls, 2 swivel clasps, 1 slider, 4 rectangular rings, 4 strap ends. This is for the way I'm doing the straps. I have 5 purse feet here, but you only need 4, a zipper end, and then 2 more strap ends if you want them for your crossbody strap. You're also going to need 2 1-inch D-rings for the crossbody strap. Okay, so you're going to need your main pocket flap. On the outside one, you're going to have some fleece fused to that, 2 bottom band pieces, two crossbody connector pieces, 4 handle connector pieces. Now I'm doing my straps different because I want to do a double-sided strap. So I've cut 4 pieces at 4 by 19 inches for my special straps. And same with my crossbody strap, I want them to be double-sided, so I cut them 2 inches by 54 inches, 2 colors. Okay, so your gusset piece, you're going to need 2 exterior pieces, 2 lining pieces, and then I am also going to adjust because I want my top of mine to be a vinyl, so I've made those adjustments accordingly. For top bands, you can either do these 2 in vinyl and 2 in lining if you prefer. You're going to need 2 lining pieces and 2 exterior pieces for the zipper panels. Your exterior zipper panel. Now these are for my special slip pocket and zipper pockets that I like to do for my lining. You're going to need a line or 2 pieces for your slip pocket in the front. You are going to need 2 lining panels, a front organizer panel, an organizer back panel, 2 front side pieces cut mirror to one another, your card slot piece, your organizer zipper pocket piece for the lining pieces, and these are the lining pieces for the exterior and the interior zipper pockets. Okay. You're going to need a zipper facing, and then your interior zipper facing, organizer slip pocket pieces, and a piece of Decovil Heavy for the bottom for stability, and foam stabilizer. Also, I have a piece of Peltex to stabilize my front panel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the double-sided straps. You can find that class down in the description below. Okay, so now we are going to work on the flap. Now this I am doing slightly different than the pattern because I am using vinyl pieces. So if you're following the pattern, you put them right sides together, you would sew along leaving the top open and then turn it out and top stitch. I am actually going to edge paint these. So because I'm using vinyl pieces and a non-fraying fabric, I could do this. So I'm going to take the 2 pieces, right sides together, or wrong sides together, sorry. And I'm just going to use some double-sided tape to hold them in place. And then I'm going to go around here with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and then trim it down to 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now this whole tutorial is done on my brand new cylinder arm. As you can see, I am still learning how to use her. I am not sure 100% how to use this laser. I had the laser set to where I think 3/8 of an inch is, but I don't trust it to stay in place just yet, so I've also put my magnetic seam allowance guide here as well until I get used to that. So I'm going all the way around with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, to attach those two pieces together. Okay, so I am going to trim this. I am not going to trim the straight edge. I'm going to leave that as is, but all the way down the other three sides, I'm going to trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now the reason I'm doing this is I really like the look of an all vinyl flap, and I really like the look of a shiny edge-coated edge on a flap. So that is why I'm doing that. I do have an edge paint class down in the description below if you want to learn how to edge paint. Okay, so these were the gusset pieces. I want the top of my gussets to match my zipper panel and everything at the top. So I cut 2.5 inches off of my gusset pieces, and then I cut a 3-inch piece of the vinyl to put on top. So it'll end up being the same, if I have my measurements right, it will be the same length as the regular gusset pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and sew across here with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to go ahead and top stitch the seam into place like this one. And then I'm making sure that my seam is facing down, and I'm just going to top stitch through the lining side. You would not do this step if you're following the pattern. You just keep the gusset pieces as is. Okay, so now I'm going to take my exterior gusset pieces and match up one of the short ends. Hold it in place with clips. And we're going to sew across here with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if you are wanting to know how the laser works, so I am adjusting my laser here to 3/8, and you can see I just line it up with the edge of my fabric, and then I can use that as a guide for my seam allowance. And I also have my magnetic seam allowance, a guide there, just to make sure that the laser isn't moving until I get more used to my machine. Okay, so now I'm going to open up that seam, and I'm going to top stitch down each side of that seam that we just created. This is helpful because it also creates our center mark for when we go to put the bag together. Okay, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with the bottom of the lining pieces. So now that we have those two aside, I've put the lining piece aside. I'm going to take my heavy stabilizer, Decovil Heavy in this case. I'm going to find my centers along the long edge, and I am going to line that up with that center seam there to know my center, and I went ahead and I fused that on. Now I am going to place my optional purse feet. So you want the purse feet from the center to be 3.5 inches from the center line and 1.25 inches down from the long side of the gusset piece. So 1.25 down, 3.5 over from the center mark. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've marked all 4 placement places for my purse feet, and I'm going to go and install them. Okay, so now we are going to do our organizer slip pocket piece. So you're going to fold it in half like so, and you're going to top stitch along the folded edge. Just like so. Of course, on one side my doggies are upside down because it's directional, but that's okay, nobody's going to see that. So now I'm going to take this and place it onto my organizer back piece. And I'm going to match up the edges, use my clips to keep it in place. And I want to find the center bottom and the center top of this piece. So I'm just going to fold it in half and do very small clips to mark those centers. And then I'm going to take my air erase pen and I'm going to draw a center line down that slip pocket piece, because we are going to separate this pocket piece into 2 pockets. So now I'm going to baste around here, top stitch around either side of the line and back up the other side. So just with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now as I approach that center line, I'm going to stay 1/8 of an inch to the right of that and do a line up. And I'm going to hand crank to make sure my needle falls within my stitching so I have a nice clean line. Hand crank 2 stitches over. So I'm 1/8 of an inch on the other side of that line, work my way down, and then finish basting the rest of the raw edges. Now for my slip pockets, I like to put a rivet in there backed with a small piece of scrap Decovil Heavy, just so I know those stitches aren't going to pop with use. Okay, so now we are going to take our organizer zipper pocket facing. From the 2 short ends, I'm going to draw on the wrong sides a 1-inch line. And then from the top side, I'm going to draw a 1-inch line. And then parallel to that line, I'm going to do another line 1/2 inch below it. So I have this rectangular looking piece. Okay, now I want to find the center of this facing because I want my zipper pocket to be nice and centered with this panel. So again, I just use little snips. You can also use a marking pen if you don't want to use snips. Just make sure the snips are within the seam allowance. And then I'm going to match up my center snips. And along that top, I am going to hold the facing in place with my clips. And then I'm going to sew along this rectangle. Now if you're using an industrial machine, definitely make sure you hold your tails back because otherwise they get all stuck down in the bobbin mechanism and the hook and you can break your machine that way. Ask me how I know. The reason I'm on my cylinder arm is because I did just that with my flatbed and I am currently waiting for my part to arrive. So this whole tutorial is done on my cylinder arm, which is actually quite a bit of fun. A real good way for me to really learn how to be one with this machine very quickly as I've only had it a couple weeks. Okay, so now what we want to do is go in 3/8 of an inch is what I'm going to do from each of those short ends that we sewn, and then 1/4 inch up to draw a center line in between those 2 short lines. And then I'm going to do little V's out. And then I'm going to use those lines as a guide to cut where my zipper is going to go. So I'm going to cut to those lines, and then when I get to the V's, I'm going to cut into the V's as close as I can to the stitching without cutting the stitching. And then you're going to take the facing and you're going to flip it wrong sides together through that hole. And then and if you're using vinyl, be very careful on the back side to press it. But go ahead and do that. Now, I use zipper tape to do all of my zipper pockets. Please, please, please know what your machine's limitations are. If your machine does not handle leather double-sided tape, mine can because it's industrial. Please don't use it. You can try Dritz Wash Away Wonder tape. I use that with my domestic. And it gummed up my needle a little bit, but not like this leather tape would. So otherwise, you can go ahead and just hold the zipper in place when you're doing this or use clips to put it together. Okay, so I'm going to take one of the lining pieces, my zipper, and I'm going to put my zipper right side up and my lining piece right side up. And I'm going to sew across that with 1/4 inch seam allowance and then repeat with the other side. Okay, so I have my zipper panel all done here. And my completed zipper hole here, we're on our front organizer pocket. Again, I'm using more double-sided tape. This is where you would have to hold it in place if you can't use the double-sided tape. You just hold it in place while you sew. I would not recommend this tape for a domestic machine, this leather tape that I am using. Okay, so you are going to eyeball where you want to center that zipper within the zipper pocket hole that we have made. So I like to do the top first, and then when that's done, I place my bottom. Just like so, and you are going to make sure that one of the linings is up and the other one is down, and go around here and top stitch with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I want to have a seamless line without any back stitching not showing, so I'm pulling my tails long, and I'm going to hold on to them and start my top stitching without back stitching. Needle down when you have to go around the corners. Now I'm just going to go in and I'm going to pull my tail through the back side. I can't quite get to it yet. I'll do that here in a moment. Here we go. Pull it through to the other side, that first tail. And then when I come to the start point, I'm going to make sure I put my needle down in the same hole that I started in, the same stitch. Pull it long, and then use the bobbin side of the thread to pull the top thread through. And now you should have 4 strands of thread, and you can tie them in a knot. I like to tie them in 3 or 4 knots here. And what this does is make it so we don't have a thick backstitch look on the right side of our bag here. Okay, so now I'm going to fold the lining down. I'm going to hold the exterior out of the way, and I am going to sew and seal up this pocket. So I like to backstitch over the zipper teeth a few times and then follow it down. You can see here that my cutting wasn't necessarily really good for this lining piece, but that's okay. I will make it nice and even right now, as you can see. And what this does is it closes up the zipper pocket. And then trim that seam allowance up to about 1/4 of an inch or so. It doesn't have to be exact. And I'm also going to trim away the top of the facing, just to reduce some of the bulk. And we have a working zipper pocket. Okay, so now we are going to work on the card slots. I've gone ahead, again, I've used EB Fuse Medium. I've already gone and marked my lines as per what the pattern says. And I like to use a piece of comic book board to help me get a nice crisp line. So at that first 3-inch line that we've drawn, which is actually the bottom, we're going to fold our slots wrong sides together and give it a good press using the comic book board as a nice and crisp edge. Now the first couple of folds are always a little awkward, and then it's easier. Okay, so now we are going to want to fold it right sides together at the next line. Like so, and give it a good press. And then I will take my comic book board again to fold it wrong sides together along the third line. Give it a good press. And then right sides together on the next line. And then wrong sides together. Rinse and repeat until the end. Okay, then I just like to eyeball it and straighten it out if it needs a little bit of straightening out and giving it another good press. Adjusting if you need to. Okay, and then I just like to take a card and make sure that they do fit and they are nice and even all the way through. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to top stitch each of these folded edges. So as you do this, you're folding, like here, the one raw edge at the top, we've folded it to the back. We've got our first fold done. Now we're going to fold that section to the back and do the next folded line, and so on and so forth. So on, so forth. See what I did there? So on, so forth. Ha ha. There we go. Okay, so now you want to trim this up so it's the length or the measurements it calls for in the pattern. If you do need to trim some up like I did, you're going to trim it off of the top of this panel. So then I'm going to go ahead and I am going to baste down the sides just to hold these folds in place. And the other side. And then that we had drawn a center line here. This is to separate our card slots into numerous card slots. As I get to each fold, I'm going to do a slight back stitch. And what that is going to do is just stabilize those card slots so the pockets won't, the stitches won't pop with use. Okay, so that part is done. Now we are going to work on the organizer zipper panels. So I've got them all cut here. If you've watched my videos before, you have seen me do this numerous times. We are going to take the ends and we are going to fold them down to a 90-degree angle, like so. And what this is doing is creating a stop for our zipper by the yard. Then we're going to take this to the machine and we are just going to baste that in place. Do the same with the other one. Using a stiletto to hold this in place sometimes helps. You do not want to sew through your finger by accident. Ask me how I know. I have done it. So stiletto definitely helps. You could also hand sew these in place. Some find that easier. I am not a hand sewer. But yeah, that would be very easy for this as well. Okay, and you want to make sure that they're folded down almost evenly here, as even as you can. Okay, and then you want to measure these. So from the top folds of our zippers, we want to measure down 6.5 inches. And I'm going to take my Choco and just draw a line at that 6.5 inch mark on both zippers. Double check that they are 6.5 inches to there. Okay, I debated filming the next few clips as I made a major mistake. Make sure your zippers are right side up for this part. I sewed mine on upside down. I like to keep my mistakes in so you can learn from my mistakes. I ended up pulling out all my stitches and redoing them. I do not show correcting this on camera. It's the exact same process, just with the zippers the right way around. Okay, so we are going to take our zippers and our card panel. I started to do it right here, but of course I did not. Make sure your zips are right side up. Do not do what I'm doing with them right side down. They're right side up. You're going to match that chalk line with the bottom of the card slot panel. And you're going to clip them together. Again, your zipper should be right side up, not the what I've done here. But you would do the exact same process with the zipper right side up. Matching up those raw edges. And do the same with the other side, matching up that 6.5 inch line with the bottom raw edge. Again, your zipper will be right side up, not right side down. I have made this mistake so many times. It's a common thing. But I wanted to show you guys that, hey, we all make mistakes. Okay, make sure they're somewhat even to the top and go ahead and baste those on. I have put my zipper foot on here. I find it a lot easier. I am not used to my table here. I have it a little bit wobbly. I don't usually have the table on my cylinder arm, but for the use of today's tutorial, I do. So it's very important that when we sew these zippers on that we are only using 1/4 inch seam allowance, because if we go too far in, our cards are not going to sit in those slots. So normally when I sew zippers on, I use a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but for these card slots, make sure you are only using 1/4 inch. Otherwise, you're going to be a little bit shy of being able to fit your cards in. Okay, so I went ahead and I just made some little tack stitches at the bottom of my zipper so I can pull my pulls out of the way. Again, if you're doing this property, your zippers will be right side up. You're going to take the organizer front panel, put it right sides together with the card slots, and match up all raw edges here. Sandwiching the zipper tape in between the card slots and the front panel. And along the top as well. Now you are going to leave the bottom of this open. We're only going to sew 1/4 inch up the 3 sides, leaving the bottom open. Again, very important to make sure this is only 1/4 inch. Otherwise your card slots will be too small. Make sure your needle is down when you pivot. This machine is great because it does have an automatic needle down position. Okay, so now what you want to do is, I'm just trimming off the tails of our zippers here. And I'm just going to trim the corners so I can get a nice point when I turn this out. And go ahead and turn it out, and you are going to see my zippers are facing the wrong way because I put my zippers the wrong way around. So all I did to correct this was flipped it back out, pulled out all my stitches, and did it all over again. Okay, so now that I have my zippers going the correct way, we are going to go ahead and put in our firm stabilizer, kind of see which way it goes in. It is going to be tight, and you're going to slip it up into this zipper panel. You want to make sure it's nice and tight to the top, and I'm going to hold it with clips because we are going to be top stitching through this, and it's also going to top stitch through that Peltex piece. So go ahead and do that with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, what I like to do is just put my card in first, just to double check how much leeway I have, because if you top stitch too much, you could make it so your cards don't fit. So I'm going to do a very scant 1/8 of an inch seam allowance because I think I overjumped my seam just a smidgen. So on my industrial machine, I am using a top stitch length of approximately 5.5 to 6 inches. It does look like it's a lot shorter than that, but really it isn't. I have a freshly oiled machine, as it's very important to keep your industrials oiled. So the oil kind of gives the illusion of a shorter stitch when it's not. So this is like a very scant 1/8 of an inch because I knew I was very close to my card slots here, so I want to make sure my cards are going to fit. Okay, so I'm just going to double check that my cards fit, and they do. Now the card slots will be tight at first. They will loosen with use. Okay, so now we're going to take our front outer zipper panel here and put it over our slip pocket pieces. And align they're both right sides up. Going to align our zipper along the raw edge here. And the other side as well. And then we're going to take our front sides. Now on our pattern pieces, there was a mark which side is going to be against our pocket. So I wrote pocket on the back side so I would not forget which side was which. These pieces are mirrored to one another. So we're putting the front side pieces right sides together with the zipper, making sure it lines up with the back organizer panel there. Keep your zipper pulls out of the way. And go up each side with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I did a little bit of a back stitch just over where the zipper is to give it a little bit extra stability or security. Again, we are leaving the bottom open. We are just doing the sides right now. I'm going to trim off my zipper tail here. And then I'm going to fold this so it's all right side open, making sure my seam is going to that front side piece and top stitch down there. Using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Coco's a little excited upstairs if you guys can hear. I apologize. Okay, so I went aside and I did that with both sides, and I have trimmed off my extra zipper tails here, and to make sure my zipper pull doesn't accidentally get pulled off, I'm just putting some wonder clips to hold it in place there to act as a stop. Okay, so now it is time to install our turn lock. You can see here how awesome the edge paint looks along that edge. It's a nice shiny edge. So now I'm going to take my flap pattern piece, and I've marked the center on my flap and the center on my pattern piece. Now because we didn't trim off any seam allowance off of the top, I know I can line up that center and the top. Now the pattern piece is going to be bigger than the sides because we did trim the side seam allowances up, but as long as that top is lined up, we're good. And I have a little hole marked in the center there. I'm just going to take my Tandy leather marking pen and mark that hole. And that is going to be the center of our turn lock for our female piece. So this bag is kind of heart themed. I've got heart zipper pulls and a heart turn lock. And I'm just going to eyeball it with the back plate here, about center in that oval. Take my leather marking pen, and I'm going to draw that oval. And I'm also going to draw where my screws are going to go. And then I am going to find a punch that's about that size, and I'm going to punch through that hole. Okay, so I just got this inexpensive leather punch set off of Amazon. It was like $15. It is amazing. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I found an oval that's about the right size, and I'm just going to bang, bang, bang until I cut all the way through. Make sure you are using a cutting board. I'm using a cutting board that my son made me like 6 years ago in woodshop class. It is actually perfect for this. Sorry for the shaking camera. I wanted to show this process. I mean, my table just shakes everywhere when I'm hammering through my punches. So you can see how nice that is. It went through all the pieces there. Nice clean hole. And now I'm going to just take my hand punch and I am going to punch out circles where these screws are going to go. Again, I just got this hand punch. I actually need a new one. It's kind of dull now, but I just got it off of Amazon, or you can buy them at Michael's or Tandy Leather or any leather working type place. And then I'm going to take my piece like this, and you can see how perfect it is going to fit. I'm going to go ahead and do that and install my back plate, and the flap installation of the female part of the turn lock will be complete. So there it is. Perfect. Now for the screws, I always use a little bit of medium blue thread locker just to make sure the screws won't come loose later on. Okay, so I have my center mark here, and we have the center of this front panel. I'm going to match them up. And then we're going to go ahead and baste the flap onto this panel, the organizer panel. Oh, I lied. First we want to mark the center where the center of the oval again. And this is going to give us a guideline where we are going to put in our female piece. We will attach the flap after this part. So now that we have that little dot, I'm going to use my washer here, line up little circles, and then draw my cut lines for the prongs. So I'm going to use my X-Acto knife. Be very careful not to cut yourself. You want to cut through this Peltex piece as well. So I'm going to push that up towards the exterior, and I'm going to cut through those slits without cutting my fingers. And you also don't want to cut through the lining and the card slots there, just through the Peltex and the vinyl piece here. And then put your prongs through, like so. Install your washer. And I push my prongs to the center. I don't know if that's right. It's always worked for me. I've never had them come off. just like that. And then I'm just going to take my mallet and just hammer it a little bit just to make sure my prongs are nice and flat. And then I just take a piece of duct tape and I put it on the back of those prongs just so the prongs don't wear away at the lining piece behind it. Okay, and now you can match up those center marks again. You can make sure that your turn lock fits and clip across the top. Again, you can probably hear Coco in the background. I apologize. I think the mailman is here. She's protecting the house. And if you can't hear her, then you just don't know what I'm talking about. But she is barking right now. All right, and go ahead and baste that on. So that's all done. So you can see we're perfectly lined up. Okay, now we are going to take our top band. Now you want to make sure the wide end of the top band is going along the top of our organizer piece. I am going to snip my centers. And I'm going to lie this, matching up that center, right sides together. Now you may notice that it looks like my side panel is a little bit long. That's probably because I didn't get my seam allowance quite close enough with the zipper. We can trim that up here in a moment. Now you're going to do the same with the bottom panel piece, but on the bottom. So match up that center, and this is going to close up where that Peltex piece where we installed the turn lock is. Okay, so we're going to go ahead with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. Again, you can see I have my laser set perfectly here at 3/8. I'm just making sure that my laser doesn't move until I get used to using it. I don't know if this is the proper way of using the laser. This is how I'm using the laser. I know it is supposed to help you with your seam allowances, so I have it so as long as I follow that light along the raw edge of my whatever I'm sewing, that should be the 3/8. As you can see, I didn't follow it very well. Okay, so all fixed up now. Okay, and now I'm going to push that up with my seam allowance pointing to the top and go ahead and top stitch that with a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And what you're seeing there is oil from my machine. I keep my machines very well oiled. These are very expensive machines, so I oil them every single day. Okay, you're going to do the exact same thing with the bottom band. So I'm going to attempt to just use that laser. See how I have it lined up there? With the edge, I had already measured with my ruler from the needle that that's 3/8 of an inch. Now when I get to the bottom of the zipper, I'm just going to back stitch over the zipper teeth just a little bit for a little extra security. Again, fold that back so the seam is pointing towards the bottom of the bag this time, and top stitch that seam in place. And the panel is done. That's the hardest part, guys. Everything else is super easy. Okay, so now we're going to work on the back side. So I've got my exterior zipper pocket here. And we're going to kind of do the same process as we did with the facing for the lining panel. Now on our exterior facing piece, on the back panel, there's little dots on it. I just cut some little lines through those dots and I'm tracing them onto the wrong side of my zipper, exterior back zipper panel facing. I'm going to find the center of this and the center of my exterior zipper panel and place some right sides together, matching up that center. And I'm going to sew along that dotted line. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to take my picking shears and I'm going to cut within like 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, something like that, right along that curve. And then we're going to take the facing and that exterior piece and we are going to put them wrong sides together, finger pressing those seams out best you can. If you're using all cotton, you can definitely go ahead and take this to the iron. If you're using vinyl, just be very careful not to touch the vinyl with it if you're doing it from the back side. Now, because I am using vinyl, I don't want to melt the vinyl, so I'm just going to use some double-sided tape outside of the seam allowance. So if you are using a domestic machine, this will not affect your stitching at all if you do this. I'm just going to pull my facing nice and taut to get a nice crisp seam there on the other side. This is just holding it in place, but it's outside of where we will be stitching. Again, my machine can handle double-sided tape no problem because it is an industrial. I know some domestics can. It's just all a matter of knowing what your machine can handle, whether you use double-sided tape or not. Okay, there we go. Okay, so again, I am using the double-sided tape. You can use the clips as well. So I'm going to put some double-sided tape along the short edge of our zipper lining panel. I did mine in just one big piece. You'll see why. And you're going to put some along the bottom side. The panel, or the pattern calls for 2. We will be cutting this into 2. This is just a little bit of a shortcut for me. Now you're going to place your zipper right side up on top of the lining that's right side up. And go ahead and stitch that with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I'm still using my zipper foot. It just makes it so much easier when you're doing zipper stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to take the tape off of my other side. If you're using clips, you wouldn't use tape. You would just take and clip this side to the other side of the zipper tape. And then go ahead and sew that on with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, and then now I'm going to cut these into just right at that center mark, like so. Okay, so I've pressed that open, so one is going up and one is going down. Again, I'm going to use more double-sided tape here. This is another place where you would just have to hold it in place. If you were using vinyl, you definitely cannot use pins. If you're using cotton, you could use pins to hold this in place if you can't do the double-sided tape. Otherwise, you're going to just have to hold it in place with your hands. Okay, so I want my zipper pull to be closing to the left, and I'm going to take this panel and I am going to line it up the top, short little top things there should line up with the top of our zipper tape like so. You want it to be nice and centered, so we'll be able to catch both of the shorter ends of our zipper tape when we top stitch this. Like so, and we're going to go ahead and top stitch that in place. Definitely make sure you have one lining going up and the other lining going down, otherwise you will be sewing shut your pocket. And we don't want that. See, the zipper fits nice because the pull doesn't get in the way. And then when we get to the top, after the top stitching, we are going to go ahead and baste into place the top of that zipper. Still with the one side of the lining upwards. Okay, now just like we did with the other pocket, we're going to pull the lining pieces down towards each other like so. And we are going to close up that lining pocket. So fold or pull the exterior out of the way. And once again, we're going to witness my bad cutting skills. I admit when I cut my zipper pockets, I just kind of wing it. And they're not always even, but you always can even them out with this stitching. As you can see, I'm just double checking that I'm catching both layers of that lining pocket, the zipper pocket lining. See, not very even. But we'll be trimming that all up, so it's all good. And we have a working zipper pocket. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim up those seam allowances to about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to do exactly like we did with the front panel. We have our top band and our bottom band. Do it exactly like we did on the front. Okay, so now we are going to make our crossbody strap connectors. I've done one. So I'm going to take some double-sided tape. Again, you can use clips. I've drawn a center line down the center, and I'm going to fold the longer edges into the center like so. Take another small piece of double-sided tape. Take my D-ring, and I'm going to fold it into the middle and fold the other end into the middle. Now we're going to take another piece of double-sided tape. Again, if you're using cotton, you can use pins to pin this onto our gusset pieces, but I'm using double-sided tape because I can. Okay, so on our short ends of our gusset pieces for the exterior, you're going to find your center, so you can use marking pen or clips like I do. You're going to draw a centered 1-inch line, 1 1/4 inches down from that center mark. So I have it at the 1/2 inch mark there, and I'm just going to draw a line between what you see as my 2 and 3. That's nice and centered. And that's going to be my guide where I'm going to put the fold of the D-ring. Like so. You would do the exact same thing with the opposite side. And we are going to go ahead and we are going to top stitch this on at the machine. Now you may notice I'm standing up. I am only 5'2" and this machine is very tall. I could lower it a little bit, but then that defeats the purpose of the cylinder arm because then it would be too close to my lap to do the cylinder arm work. I do have a drafting chair coming, so hopefully that's going to help, but for this project, I get to stand up the whole time. Okay, so again, I left my tails long because I don't want to have that back stitch mark. And I'm going to turn about 1 inch away from the fold of the D-ring and go across. I'm going to pull my top thread to the back from where I started. And then I'm going to make sure my stitches end exactly where they started. Pull my tails long, and then go ahead and pull my top thread back and tie them off. It just leaves a nice flawless line without a back stitch mark there. And it doesn't take that much time. Again, 3 or 4 knots to hold them in place. And because I'm using a nylon polyester bonded thread, I'd never know what order those words go in. I just use a lighter to melt the ends. Okay, so that gusset piece is done. Now we are going to work on our connector pieces for the handles. Again, I am doing this different. Well, this part is kind of the same as the pattern, but I am not attaching my handles at this point. I'm going to rivet my handles on later. I have done my handles different than how Celine does it in the pattern. But definitely take a look at her tutorial if you want to do it her way. So I folded the long edges into the center, and I am just going to top stitch down each side. I'm actually going to chain stitch all 4, just so I don't have to cut my thread too many times. This is how I actually do the majority of my sewing when I am not doing a tutorial. I do a lot of chain stitching with my pieces. I find it just helps speed things up a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to cut those 4 apart. And then we are going to install the rectangular rings. So you're going to take your rectangular ring and you're going to fold that connector in half, and you're just going to baste the bottom. Again, I am going to chain stitch these so I don't have to cut my thread. That's all 4 done just like that. Okay, so I've cut them all apart. This is what we have. Now from the folded edge, I am going to take my chalk pen and I am going to mark down 1 inch. And this is going to give us the guide of where we want to baste these onto our front and back panels. Okay, so I am doing this part a little bit different than the pattern. I'm measuring in 2 3/8 in. If you followed the pattern, you would have had the gusset and everything installed on this already. I just find this a little bit easier, but if you're doing it her way, you will only be measuring in 2 inches. I've taken into account that I'm going to have a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there, so I have measured in 2 3/8 of an inch. And this is where I am going to place my connectors, at that 1 inch line that I drew, on both the front and the back. Okay, so I have those basted. I'm just making sure that they are even. Now I'm going to find the bottoms centers of both of my main panels. And now it is time to complete the exterior. Okay, so we're going to take our gusset piece. Now our center seam here marks the center of our gusset. We are going to take it and put our gusset right sides together with one of our exterior panels, matching up that bottom center. And we're going to match up the top corners like so. And then as we work down, we are going to evenly distribute the fabric all the way around the curve. You can also see on the connectors I added some rivets. That is completely up to you. I like to just add them on for decoration, and it adds a little extra security and stability on the connector pieces. Okay, you can see how it doesn't look like my gusset wants to go around that corner. So what we're going to do is just put in some little 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch little notches there, and it just helps distribute that fabric and spread it around so we can get it around that corner. Do the same with the other corner. This also helps avoid getting nips and tucks when we're sewing around those corners. Okay, we're going to sew around there with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And for my industrial machine for sewing, I usually use a 4. I'm just double checking that I'm a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here. But I usually use a number 4 stitch length on my industrials. And take your corners nice and slow just to make sure you don't have any nips and tucks in there. I like to put my hand kind of inside the bag like I'm doing here just so I can feel what's going on with the fabric there. And then another thing I like to do, this is just something that I like to do, is I like to go around again 1/8 of an inch in from that line. So you're not going outside of that line to create a bigger seam, just on the inside of that line. I just think it helps create a little bit more stability in the bag. And sometimes, you know, you can sometimes see your thread showing through the seam, and this makes it so that does not happen. Just like so. So go ahead and put the back on the exact same way. So I sewed the back on, I turned it out, and our exterior is complete. Okay, now we are going to work on our recessed zipper panel. So I've done 3 pieces already. You want to take on one of the short sides and fold it in 1/4 of an inch. So I've drawn a 1/2 inch line, and I'm just folding it into that line on all 4 pieces. I've taken my zip, and just like we did with the other, I have turned them 90 degrees. You can see I do not have my pull on here. I'm going to install it later, so I am going to draw a straight line on the back side of my zipper tape, and that's going to help us with installation of the zipper pull later so we get it straight. So you can pull your zipper apart. You're going to take one of your lining panels with your folded edge to the right. we are going to measure in along the top there, 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just marking it with my air pen here. I'm going to use a little bit of zipper tape. Again, if you don't want to use zipper tape, please use clips. And where our 90-degree angle on our zipper is, we are going to line that up with that 3/8 of an inch line, with our zipper right side up and our lining panel right side up. And I'm just going to trim off that tail a little bit. Okay, so we're going to take our exterior, make sure our fold is to the right, and we are going to put it along the bottom of this one. And then we are going to put this right sides together with the panel we just did. Okay, now we want to make sure that they line up. You can see they're a little bit off. My one is a little longer, so I'm just going to pull it up and then fold it over again to make sure they're even. Okay, now we are going to take the other one. Now it's going to be opposite. So we're still going to make sure our zipper or our folds are to the right, but we are going to put this one on the bottom, the marking on the bottom of the lining piece. So our folded edge is to the right, and we are going to match it up with that 3/8 line. And same with our exterior piece, folded to the right, and we are going to put it along the top. So same thing, just opposite. Making sure your zipper tape is face up with your lining face up, and then your exterior piece goes right side down. Okay, now we are going to sew this with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to go across here, down here, just the two sides. Now when I get to the zipper teeth, I just do a little bit of a back stitch just for that extra security, and then go all the way across the raw edge of the zipper tape. So you have your long tail sticking out the end there. Okay, so now I am going to take my more tape. I love my double-sided tape. You can just finger press this as well. And I'm putting it along the seam there because I am going to fold my seam up and my panel up like so. I just want a nice and tight seam here. If you're using cotton, you can of course press this. I'm going to trim my corner at an angle to get a nice sharp corner right here. And then the same on the lining side. Now keep in mind, if you're using tape, this will be in the top stitch seam, so make sure your machine can handle it. Make sure your folded ends are nice and even. And we are going to go top stitch across here and down the sides and baste along the bottom. I'm actually going to start at the bottom basting, and then it's a top stitch up the other three sides. And then you're going to repeat the process for the other zipper panel. Okay, so I'm just making sure that they are even, and I'm going to find the center of these zipper panels. just by little snips. Now this is where my chalk lines are going to come in handy. I want to install my zipper pull just to make sure I am even. So what we want to do is once we put it in there, I'm using my fork, which I use for installing my pulls. And I want to line up those white chalk lines so I know I have a straight zipper. First, I'm going to show you what it looks like if you don't get it straight. So I'm putting it in. And you'll see my lines are just a little bit off. And being just that little bit off, you can see how right here it is off kilter. So take your time, making sure you're lining up those lines nicely. And the reason I'm doing this right now rather than at the end of the bag, we will do this again at the end of the bag, is just because I want to make sure I have my zipper panels nice and even with one another. So it usually takes me 2 or 3 times to get that line nice and straight. You can see I have it there. And we have perfection. Okay, so now that we know that, I'm actually going to take my zipper pull off again because it's a lot easier to work these panels without the zipper on. Okay, so as I said before, my decorative zipper pockets and decorative slip pockets is how I do all of mine. I have left my class down below on how to do them if you want to do them this way. Otherwise, follow along in the pattern with the pattern way. All right, I've marked my center at the top here. I'm going to take my zipper panel here. I'm going to use double-sided tape. Again, you can use clips. And we are going to put these both right sides up. We're going to put, right sides up. So the lining piece is right side up and the zipper panel is right side up. Like so. And we are going to do the same with the other side, but it's going to face opposite. So whereas on that one piece we had the 90-degree angle to the left, on this piece we're going to have the 90-degree angle to the right. Like so, and then I'm just going to make sure they're even, so they're going to line up once we have it all sewed together. Now I'm going to take my top band, my other 2 top bands, and I'm going to attach them along this top raw edge, and the top band is going to go right sides together. I'm going to do the same with the other panel, and sew across here with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, I'm going with my laser. I'm trying to get used to this way of tracking my seam allowance. Lots of learning going on this time. For me, that is. Okay, and then I want that seam. Oh, I'm going to do it with the other side as well. Okay, so I'm going to fold this back on itself. I'm going to use some tape to make a nice crisp seam. Again, finger press this if you can't use tape. And you want the seam to be pointing towards the top. And then we're going to top stitch along the top there. And you'll do the exact same thing with the other side. Okay, so now I took the lining gusset and the lining front and back panel and I assembled them exactly the same as the exterior with a few differences. I left a big opening on one side of the bottom. I made sure that I lined up my bands here because I changed my gusset. I started sewing down at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. As I came around the curve, I branched out to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then about here went back to a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And that just makes it so we have a less baggy bag lining in our bag. All right, so now we're going to take our exterior of our bag. I like my zipper pocket to be at the back, so I'm going to orientate this correctly and put the lining and the exterior right sides together, marking up or matching up my center marks on both the exterior and the lining pieces and clipping them in place. We're almost done. Now we do have our connector still popping out here. That's okay. You want to match up these seams here and open them up to reduce the bulk. And then continue clipping all the way around the bag. Okay, so now that's done, we're going to go ahead and we are going to stitch this with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now as we go, I think my laser slipped it a little. You're going to see it looks like I'm doing about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's really not that, it's only an 1/8 of an inch more, so I'm not too worried about it. Kind of noticed it after. It's all good. Now when I get to my connectors, I like to go a little back stitch over them just to give them a little extra security. You can totally see I'm unsure about my laser. I will get used to it, I promise. Make sure your seams are open as you come to them. Almost there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to just double check everything was caught. I'm going to trim off my connectors here. And then we're going to pull the bag through the opening in the bottom of the bag. Hardest part is always getting that bottom through, and once you get that bottom through, it just slides through easily. Okay, reach in through that opening and push out your exterior seams before we put our lining into the bag. Double check that everything was caught along that seam, and then push the lining in when all looks well. And then I like to fold in where our top stitch seam is going to be, and I like to hold it once I finger pressed it all with clips. So go ahead and do that all the way around. Okay, and now we are going to top stitch it. Now the seams there for me were a little bit thick. My machine can handle it, but A hump jumper, if you can't get over there, would definitely help to make sure that you don't eat up your vinyl. Again, I'm using very, very thick vinyls here. If you think right at the connector point, we're going through almost 8 layers. There, and then all that's left to do is to seal up the bottom and add in a few extra things here. So we're going to open up our zipper pocket where we left the opening in the bottom. I'm going to pull the opening through the bottom. This is my go-to way for closing up every bag. And I'm going to clip that opening shut. And what this does is it avoids that ridge at the bottom of the bag if you were just to close it through the lining. Okay, and remember we're going to do this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance because we had our lining at the bottom just slightly more snug than the exterior. Okay, and then stuff that back into the bottom of the bag. Make sure you cut everything, and then we have a nice folded down edge here to seal up the lining, zipper pocket lining. And I just top stitch this closed. Stuff that back in through the zipper, and then all you have to do, and I'm going to do it off camera, is go ahead and install your zipper pull using those white lines like I showed you. Install your zip end and rivet your handles on, and we're done. And there you have it. That's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did enjoy this tutorial, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you would like to support my channel by buying me a coffee, all those funds go towards getting better equipment to better my tutorials. Currently, we are saving for better lighting. So if you want to do that, that's all down below there. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.